Timor-Leste, one of the newest countries in the world, faces substantial challenges to eradicate poverty and hunger, with some of the highest rates of child malnutrition. One superfood that is underexploited in Timor-Leste and has the potential to reverse this trend is fish. Fish are a source of protein, energy, micronutrients and fatty acids, all essential for growth and development of vision, motor skills and brain function. Timorese fishing traditions can be traced back 40,000 years, yet in recent colonial history, coastal communities have been restricted to nearshore reef fisheries. Fishing is rarely a full-time activity in Timor-Leste, but rather one component of a diverse rural livelihood system. Hence, fishing techniques are simple, labour-intensive, and result in low catch rates. Furthermore, Timor-Leste's fringing reef habitat has shown signs of depletion, and availability of fish may be a key factor in Timor-Leste's very low consumption rates compared to neighbouring countries. A cooperation between the Kingdom of Norway and Timor-Leste's Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries has helped to strengthen a key partnership between the Fisheries Department and World Fish, supporting the development of the fisheries sector through cutting-edge fisheries technology such as FADs, fish aggregation devices that draw pelagic fish close to the shore within reach of artisanal fishers. World Fish have trained a team of specialist fisheries officers in FAD building, and in the coming months 12 FAD units will have been deployed across 5 community sites. Capacity building is a core objective, and fisheries staff are key counterparts in all aspects of our work. Norwegian funding has enabled the scaling up of research to multiple and often remote pilot communities. A project vehicle and boat allow for testing and deployment of FADs and hydroacoustic research in remote areas and difficult terrain that might otherwise be ignored for logistical reasons. Research into the effect of these FADs in accumulating fish biomass is currently underway with Norwegian hydroacoustic technology from Kongsberg Maritime. This stock assessment research, overseen by collaborating scientist Professor Jeppe Kolding from the University of Bergen, aims to assess the abundance of fish in reef and FAD systems using a combination of acoustic imaging, underwater surveys and fish landings data. This innovative research is the cornerstone of a national fisheries strategy for Timor-Leste being drafted as part of this project. This strategy will guide Timor-Leste's management of sustainable fisheries that strengthen local livelihoods, fight malnutrition and enhance food security. It would not be possible without the generous support of the Kingdom of Norway and the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Jakarta.
Great.
Alex.
Hiya. Thanks for that. Seemed to be lacking in technical difficulties. I hope everyone saw it all right.
Yeah, that's good.
Can you all hear me okay? I'll share my screen. Hang on. Paul, it doesn't actually allow me to check that box you told me to check with the optimize screen sharing or what have you, so I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Let me know if you can see that, okay?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, great. So yeah, the video you just saw was made about 4 years ago. And so we've done some of that stuff, but so the data system is more in place, and so what you'll have seen from the video is that Timor and the FAD program and things is very, very small scale compared to the other examples we've seen today and throughout the Pacific. There's not a national program in Timor. It's very much still from a research perspective, and we're trying to gather evidence that allows us to sort of say this is worth doing. This is something that works. Not just in terms of increasing production, but also for improving nutrition. So you've already pretty much introduced me and World Fish, so I can skip this one. So just, I'm going to cover today, you've seen a bit of context. I'm going to say why we decided to test out FADs in Timor, a bit about the design of the FADs, but I won't really go too much into the design and the deployment because the techniques have been pretty well covered today, and it's suffice to say it's quite basic. But briefly touch on some of the challenges. And then I'll focus a bit on the data collection. So that includes vessel tracking, catch data collection systems, and then a bit of the analysis of that we use to try and estimate the rate of return. So how quickly fishing groups or fishing communities might be able to kind of recoup the expenses if they took it under themselves to deploy a FAD. How quickly could they or the government like recoup the expenses in terms of food security or in terms of actual fisher incomes? And then touch a bit on the constraints and limitations and sort of next steps of the research, which will include touching on a kind of smartphone app development in a way that hopefully talks a bit to the points raised by Mainui about the importance for data and analytics that are useful and specific to the needs of fishers and communities that are using these things. So without further ado, so in Timor, as was mentioned in the video, you got about 50% child stunting rate, which means that due to poor diet diversity, children are actually not attaining the height and development that they should be under healthy conditions. Also, the reefs in Timor are very thin and just fringing. It's not like you get in in some of the beautiful Pacific islands with large expanses of reef crest. It's really very, very thin, and then drops off to quite sharply. So there is a limit to the amount that those reef fisheries can sustain, and also in terms of, as I think we'll hear more of from Johan after this, is there's a lot of potential in diversifying catch through FADs to increase both kind of system sustainability, climate resilience, and also the biomass itself, of course, the production. So the FAD design, it is the same Indo-Pacific that we've been talking about. We use a kind of combination of concrete blocks and chained with grapple anchors. Then there's kind of a subsurface buoy, various swivels, a safety line, so we don't lose the entire thing if it cuts off below. As sort of if we lose the buoys, we don't lose the anchor system. And the attractant is a kind of combination. We've used kind of plastic strapping and coconut fronds and what have you. The picture you can see at bottom middle here, let me just get this one. So in here, this is the more traditional FAD. This is actually one of our FADs that we built, but then the community added one of their bamboo rafts to it. And the fish tend to aggregate under this, and this is the way that they fish the system, in that what they'll do is they'll actually go out in the night and put a light on this raft for a couple of hours, and some poor guy has to sit on that with it for a few hours, and then they'll detach the raft from there and let it gradually sort of drift to the side, and then they use it's similar to a sort of a purse seine, but it doesn't. They just lift up the bottom and catch scads and sort of small pelagics in there. It is worth mentioning these FADs don't catch large amounts of tuna and things like that. It's more for kind of small pelagics, a lot of mackerel, scad, and Indian mackerel and things like that. As you can see in this kind of top, where's it gone? In this top figure here, the depths in the middle here are reaching up near 5,000 meters, so around 5 kilometers deep. So you can imagine deploying the FADs in this environment is really challenging. There's extreme sort of slopes on the side of the mainland. So what we're looking at here is, I can't seem to get I'm also struggling with the laser pointer. I don't seem to get it to appear, but that's what you can see in that image. The green in the bottom bit is Australia, and then the trench between Australia and Timor, the southern coast of Timor. And then as you go to the purple in the top of the bathymetric map, that's the channel that runs between the small island of Atauro and the mainland of Timor on the north coast. And you can see that's really deep, and yet it's very narrow channel. And so it's pretty challenging deploying FADs here, which is where we first started in 2013. Some WorldFish guys from the Solomon Islands came out, deployed 3 FADs off the coast of Atauro here, and immediately lost them. We never saw any of them ever again. So they just, that was an expensive mistake. So then but we did manage to install, over the years, we've managed to install various FADs, and I think there were about 8 FADs that we used for kind of testing what I'm going to talk about, which was the FAD paper released in Frontiers last year, which some of you may have seen. So as part of it, we wanted to track vessels, and since January 2018 we've been gradually increasing the number of vessels we're tracking with this Pelagic Data Systems solar powered tracker. So it's really like plug and play. There are no buttons, the fisher doesn't need to turn it on or charge any batteries or anything. It's very small. It just needs to be installed somewhere facing the sun that it's not going to get covered up, and obviously somewhere that it's not going to get in the fisher's way. And so then we we gather a bit of information about the fisher, and then this one shows a bit of the information we give them back after. So we tell them about the project, and then and it's all completely voluntary. They don't, they're not coerced. There's no incentive, direct incentive for them to do it. They just, we've just never had any resistance, and everyone's always pretty happy to be involved. Which I do understand. That's kind of a different scenario to many places you're talking about in the Pacific. So the bottom map shows the kind of coverage we've got now. This area in the bottom left is Akusi, which is an enclave of Timor. So that outline there shows that's part of Timor, but then this is Indonesia, and then Timor starts again this side. And so we've got a fairly decent coverage of the coast, at least the north coast of Timor. This Atauro Island is a major fishing zone, and then to a lesser extent along the south coast. This gives you just a more of a dynamic, I hope it's playing okay, but gives you a dynamic view of those tracks kind of rolling through. We now have around 400, 450, can't remember the exact numbers, of vessels tracked. It's high resolution. It's positional data for every 5 seconds if you want it, and with that you can really do some cool big data analytics. You can do some machine learning about looking at patterns of fishing behavior. You can even identify the fishing type from the activity, from the pattern of the track. That represents about 40%, about 10% of the national fleet. So that gives you an idea. It's pretty small fleet. And so this is part of the issue, is that production in Timor is very low because it's focused on a relatively thin fringing reef system. And so by increasing production, we hope that we can drive some of that production inland, where the highest rates of micronutrient deficiency are. So getting a bit more geeky here. So I mentioned that from the pattern of the track, you can tell what they're doing. So obviously from the speed that they're traveling and the turning, what we call the tortuosity, so the kind of amount and degree of the turns that they're doing allow us to see whether they're fishing or whether they're steaming. And then you can kind of pull out and to some extent get rid of the steaming and then focus in on the activity that highlights where they are fishing. So allows identification if that's of interest to identify the area where they're fishing. So what this also gives us is what's called, or what I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is a vessel activity coefficient.
Just lost you, Alex. I'm not sure if you can hear us. Sounds so well so far. Right. And that's cool. You can see like one thing especially you have to be on a mobile network for the data. Alex, can you hear us? Or send us a message in the chat. You've just dropped off. Just to collect some data, but it doesn't transmit to the there is an application that does both DNS and everything else and GSM tracking, but it only does like very briefly. Are you guys in FSM? Can you hear us?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right.
We're waiting for you to tell us it's lunchtime.
We've got a bit to go yet, boys, so just hang in there. Welcome to Eat and Listen. Yeah, just for 3 hours. Okay.
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, my. What part of it did you hear last?
Just have a bit of quiet, please. A bit of quiet, thanks. So, listen, Alex.
Can you tell me what part of it you heard last, and then I start from there?
We got to the bit where you were talking about vessel activity coefficients.
Okay. All right. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, so that basically then allows you to extrapolate up to national production. So we started in early since 2016 to develop PeskAAS, which was really, so when I first moved to Timor, there were no data at all for any kind of fisheries really, other than very small database from an FAO project in, quite a few years before. And so, and the tools now exist whereby we can do this electronically or digitally and very cheaply, because most of the tools are free and open source. So we decided to put together just a system that is very similar to Tails that you'll all be familiar with, but it's not as sophisticated. It's really just built from a bit of R code and some free software and free databases such as Fishbase and things. So, but one neat thing that this does is it combines the tracking data, which is obviously the only bit that is not free in this system. It combines that with catch data that we collect on the beach from landings of fishers. And so the enumerators are currently mostly government enumerators. And so I was a little bit sneaky when designing this, because I was conscious of the fact that many of these systems get designed under project funding and they're limited to the project cycle. And then when the project goes away, the system goes away and it's completely unused. And so the data are stored in an inaccessible database, as exactly as what happened with the FAO project I mentioned. And so what I decided to do was hire enumerators under the project, but hire them under government contracts. So they were hired as government employees, and the enumerators are aware that they're a government employee. But what happens is we just provided the first year of funding for those positions. And then the government then continues to take it on as they see the value of and see the data coming in, and there's evidence to build that it's a useful program, and there's clear evidence of how much it costs to maintain and what have you. So, and then they're collecting data on a daily basis, and that then goes into, and that's using a free X form. This one's in Kobo Toolbox, but you can use ODK or any of the free kind of, and it's a very simple form. It basically just, we're using species measurements, but we don't measure every single fish. We categorize into sort of size groups. And then we're also now lumping fisheries together into kind of functional groups or into kind of FAO classifications to make it quicker. But all of those data are basically spat out on a dashboard that is publicly accessible, and I'll share the link to that. I'd invite you all to have a look, and by all means provide me with feedback and things, but it's always a work in progress, and we have workshops with government to say, is this useful? Are the data useful? What are you using them for? What do the reports look like that you're writing for them, and things. So keep in mind at this stage that this system of PeskAAS right now is very top down. Fishers are providing tracking data willingly and giving data to enumerators, to the government, for the government to do things with. And then I'll talk a bit about next steps, which focuses more kind of bottom up. So this is a map of Timor that gives you some indication of where we have tracking underway and where government enumerators are there. There's a bit more dots on here than there are enumerators. There's about 15 people out around the country on the coast, in coastal communities, that are collecting data. There's on Atauro Island. This is what the dashboard looks like. As I said, very simple. You just can put in the date range you're interested in, the municipality if that's of interest, or you can keep it as everything selected, the habitat, the gear type, and the boat type, which is either just motorized or canoe. And then you have different tabs along the top, so you can look at a map of tracked activity, which is obviously anonymous, like it doesn't identify individual fishers or anything. You can look at CPUE by month, by site, by habitat, by gear, and then you can look at the composition of the catch. and then a summary which gives you the kind of extrapolated production over the last calendar year. So we kind of employed this to look specifically at fads. So we were interested in how does kind of fishing behavior change when fads are in place? Does catch rate improve? How do they, and then what is the rate of return? So how can we see, based on the price that they're selling the fish for, how quickly could they potentially regain the expenses of that fad? And bear in mind, this is not an exact science, of course, because some of the fish they catch will be gifted to family, so they won't actually be getting direct income for that. They may not be able to sell all of their catch. So it's sort of an approximation, but it's a good estimate because this sort of data aren't that available for fads anywhere really, but there's some limited evidence of work done. So you can see here the 4 different sites we were looking at were Adara, Adarai, which is on the south coast. Adara is on that island I mentioned. Biako and Vamasi are on the north coast. And you can see that for Vamasi, it's a really clear, significant kind of increase. Also, it's quite a big difference for these other 2 in Adara and Adarai. And then in Biako, we didn't actually see any difference. And I'll talk briefly about that. These are the tracks from each of those locations. Here you can clearly see that the fishing patterns of certain boats are just going straight to the fad fishing and then straight back. These other fisheries around here are sticking near to the shore, they're sticking on the reef, and they're fishing a bit on the drop off and what have you. And then in Biako, if you look closely at the range here, there's a lot of broader fishing like further out, but no clear indication that they're going to the fad, much more than anywhere else in particular. And this was the site we didn't see much of. We didn't see any significant return from the fad. We know they're catching fish at the fad, but it wasn't any more lucrative than anywhere else. And these 2 were kind of in the middle. We did find that there was return on investment from the fad in these 2 places. So what happens when you can combine like fishing patterns and fishing catch is you can then get quite a nice understanding of nationally where are the catch rates differing, where are the big fisheries, of production. And you can see like this area here on the north coast, that's a fad there. That's Vamasi, where we saw the highest numbers. This is Adarai, where it was the site of the fad. This one was more of an anomaly, like the Adara, where the other fad was, is on this side, and that's an important fishery. But here it just happens to be a very high, very productive fishery because it's in that deep channel where we think they're catching some of the biggest stuff. And this, when we looked into it, was actually just a bad enumerator. So we sacked him. So in terms of return on investment, don't worry too much about the equation there, but this was actually based on Sharp's work for SPC. So it adapted the equation to suit our purpose, and basically used that vessel activity coefficient I told you and the price of fish and the change in CPUE between non-fad fishing and fad fishing to calculate kind of how long would it take them to regain the cost of that fad. So you can see in Biako, it was 10 years or whatever, so it was basically, it wasn't worth it. But interestingly, they do actually deploy a lot of their own fads anyway, so there must be some benefit to it. They must see that it's worthwhile. So this is probably just a factor of sampling and not really a true result per se. In Vamasi, I mean, you can see even in less than 3 weeks or what have you, they could potentially recoup the expenses of that fad, and hence there you do see them deploying quite a lot of fads on their own as well. So it's just a way of sort of saying, or evidence to government that that it could be a viable plan, and we have evidence to see that it's worthwhile for producing food and income to fishers. And if they're catching enough, then hopefully it will satisfy the local demands in coastal areas and allow fish to be traded more inland, where nutrition is more of an issue. So and that's not obviously the full story. As we all know, I'm sure fads are far more complicated than that, especially sort of in socio-political terms, like the way that communities manage fads or fad groups or individual fad fishers. Whoever deploys it kind of owns it, but do they own the fish around it? These are all ongoing questions that we don't have answers to. There is an interesting study I'll share that came out recently from the Caribbean that considers these different governance sort of solutions for fads and compares them, which was quite interesting. But what we found that also was a factor in Vamasi, where it had a very fast rate of return. They were also organized into these fad groups. And so each of the fad groups, which was made up of around 12 fishers, bought shares in a sense into that fad group. So they either contributed labor or they contributed capital for equipment or repairs or fads or boats, engines, what have you. And they were made up of around 12 people. And so that they were also invested in maintaining that fad, and also no one else was fishing that fad. And they also didn't fish it every day. They would fish it 2 or 3 times a week. And it was highly variable, but when they did get a catch, it was a very lucrative catch. So one of the advice or recommendations in the paper was that this is probably really important and should be combined with any kind of fad program. Is more kind of a campaign to raise awareness of fishing communities and fishing groups that there is this value in grouping together, investing in the business.
So Alex has stopped off again. I think we're finished. I think we're not going to have time for the Q&A session. We've got to respect these guys' time as well. So I might take 1 or 2 questions for Alex, because what he's talked about has been really important to what we've been thinking about. So who would like to start? Back? Maybe.
Sorry, I'm back.
Okay, all right.
I don't know what happened there. So yeah, the systems are possible to bring together relatively cheaply, and also World Fish are invested in the Pacific. So if we can be of use, or if I can help bring this together in any places where this would be of interest, then do reach out and let me know. I'm happy to assist. Paul, how am I doing for time? I'm conscious I don't want to waffle on.
We had hoped to have a half an hour discussion session with everyone, but I think what we'll do is we won't do that now. But I think what you've spoken about to us is of real interest, and we spoke a lot about this yesterday, and we're going to talk about it again this afternoon about how we can better monitor and work out the value of these FAD programs to inform future planning, etc. So if you've got much more to say, or you would prefer just to let us ask you a few questions before we move on to Johan?
Yep, yeah, happy to do that. So I'll tell you sort of what I was going to talk about, and that may then guide more questions. The constraints and limitations are really much the same as in many of the other places that you guys work. There's also you know, in terms of resources, capacity to, you know, to communicate the value of FADs and the engagement of fishers going forward in different places. But also in terms of the data systems, there's a real need, as was brought up by Mainui, there's a real need for data to speak to fishers and for us to develop systems that are useful to them so that we can get a more participatory engagement. And so that was really just what I was going to talk about in the last few slides, was about future research and about how we make the data more towards fishers. So encouraging a platform that is two-way communication, both up from fishers to managers and down from managers to fishers. And that way, if you build it knowing what the needs of fishers are, with the analytics that are responsive to them and are personalized to their businesses, if you will, you know, you can show them what they spent and what they gained and how that compares to last year, and a map of where they go and where they, you know, caught the most. Then they're going to engage in data collection because they see the value. And there are different elements of this, just in terms of actual production efficiency of their businesses, new market opportunities, what have you. There's also the idea of the blue economy. So raising the voice of small scale fishers in the blue economy is by gathering data and evidencing their lives, we can actually empower them to have a say in the broader, you know, decision making, because they can say, well, actually, I caught this much fish, I fed this many people, you know, this is really important to our island or our community or what have you. Also, if you have an app or some sort of system at fisher level, you can provide trainings, for example, in outboard maintenance, or other elements of safety at sea. You can have checking in, checking out when they go in and out of port. And then broader things like providing other services, so financial knowledge services, weather, and what have you. And various components of this have been tried and most have sort of failed. But I believe that's because they're built in isolation by kind of tech companies in Silicon Valley or wherever that don't really take the needs of fishers as the basis for the development of the app. They sort of say, hey, we can do this cool thing with data, let's try it out here. And then fishers are like, what does this mean to me? These are some of the, and this is the last slide. So I was just showing some of the resources. This one at the bottom is the one I mentioned that actually compares different management or governance options for FADs, which is quite nice. And this one in the middle is the paper that I based most of the results of this talk on. And they're both, these top two are open access. And this is the link to the PeskAAS site with the dashboard if you want to take a look. Thanks very much. I'll share this with you.
I think that last point about data is a two-way process is something we'll probably discuss a bit this afternoon around how we can develop that two-way process. I know I work in recreational fisheries data collection, and programs fail because fishers don't hear back what their data was informing on. So it's a really important area for us to think about. A couple of quick questions before we move on to Johan. Yep.
Sure.
You might want to speak up or come to the mic just so that we can hear.
Yeah, I think it's a great study and really interesting to see how quickly some of the FADs can pay themselves back. I noticed there is a lot of fish going to subsistence as well, and I'm just wondering if you have gone down the pathway of trying to look at some of the non-market benefits, like put a dollar figure to the health benefits and some of those objectives that were driving the program. And I guess a sense around how those two messages play out for the different stakeholders that you deal with.
Yeah, really good question. At this point, all we really know is the proportion of the catch that is sold and that is kept for food. We haven't worked that much yet down the value chain. So where those fish go, how are benefits distributed, like how does that affect nutrition? There is a study underway now that we've designed, which is a randomized control trial using FADs in Timor. but also using social and behavior change messaging. And so we're kind of using the fads as the supply end and the messaging as the demand end, and then tracking to see if there are increases in supply to rural areas, and what the difference each of those components make, what's more important in terms of kind of providing policy guidance for government. But in terms of actually tracking sort of very specific nutrition indicators in terms of dietary diversity, we haven't done that yet to a very sort of in a very extensive way, but through that experiment, hopefully we'll get some of that.
Thanks, Alex. Other question?
Yeah, Alex, what is the annual cost of the tracking system, and who is actually paying for it?
So they work out to be around around $400, so US dollars a year per unit, and that includes the hardware cost. Obviously, it's a bit more expensive for the first year, but then that equates as you use them for the data in every following year. So it works out to be about $400 a year per unit. And at the moment, well, we started off funding that as part of research, then we partnered with Pelagic Data Systems because they wanted to test it on a national scale, so they provided some of that. But then we raised more money to kind of support it while we gathered data, and now the government of Timor have taken it on and are interested in getting more units and also putting it on their offshore vessels as well. So putting it on those foreign licensed vessels and using it as part of their national monitoring system. So for now, the government are paying for it. We don't know how, I mean, the government of Timor is quite unstable politically, and so who knows, but we're calling it a success to date because because they've adopted it and have adopted the costs of it as well at this stage. So all up, I guess the program, I think it's around 150K a year, something like that. That covers all of it. All of the kind of enumerators for PeskAAS and all of the data fees for pelagic.
First VMS monitored canoe fishery in the world, I think.
Yeah.
Last question.
Yeah, two questions actually. Just the first one, a very brief one. What was included into, when you computed the return on investment, what was included into the investment cost of figures?
Oh, as in how much the FAD cost? So yeah, as I said, it's an imperfect science. I will direct you to the paper for the details, but just in general terms, I think it was $1,250 was the cost of the FAD, and that included the equipment and the deployment. But in terms of deployment, that was probably a little bit low, just because I was involved in a lot of them, driving the boat, and whereas if they're kind of locally sourced materials, they may last less time, but if the rate on return is as fast as it was in some places, then that wouldn't be an issue in terms of longevity. But yeah, so that's the kind of trade-off is, the equipment costs is the initial investment, and then how much and how long it takes to return on that. But the details are in the paper. You just need to take it with a pinch of salt, in that obviously it wasn't finely calculated like how much it costs for World Fish to put them in, but we imagine that it will cost a lot less for communities to buy, build and deploy FADs than it cost us to. So.
Yes, thanks a lot. And the second question is about whether you had any data prior to FAD's deployment. So whether you had a possible baseline for comparison when looking at returns for fishers or all that.
Yeah, we do. In fact, we've got way more non-fad data than we do fad data. So we have a number of sites, but in those sites, we did also have, I think in 3 out of the 4 sites, we had non-fad data before, or rather before and after data. And
Quick stretch of the legs. Come on, we've got one more to go. Hang in there, everyone. Punch is coming. Look, you're back. We just lost you. Again.
oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I don't know what you heard, but the details are in that paper. But it was basically we judged a price for the fad $1,250, I think it was, dollars, and we anticipated that was way more than it would cost communities to build and source sort of fads and deploy them. So we thought it was a fairly sensible figure to use to calculate investment.
Andy, all right, one more. Can't say no to Andy. Hi, Alex. Look, just a quick question. Have you always intended that you would try and, in a sense, move this program elsewhere or try it somewhere else? I mean, it seems that there's a few sort of peculiarities, if you will, about the Timor system that seems not to necessarily be reflected the same way in the Pacific. So I'm interested if you've tried this or are intending to sort of try and build a similar system in another situation.
Thanks. Yeah, it is already, I mean, I've got some funding to scale it. It's already deployed to a certain extent in here in Penang, which is an island off the coast of West Peninsula, Malaysia. And so here, because our headquarters is based here, it's a good place to kind of test new innovations and test the Fisher-based app. Because also in Timor, that's not a sensible place to try that because no fishers have smartphones. It's they're extremely kind of digitally illiterate, if you will, for want of a better term. And so, yeah, the plan is to try it. We received funding to scale it to Odisha in India, but actually then the Indian government backed out. They were initially keen, but then they backed out of it because of the tracking element. And so, yeah, we are definitely keen to try it elsewhere. The paper on the PeskAAS system is online, and as are all the code and the initial data and what have you. And so the idea is to scale it for sure. But you're right in that Timor is a bit of an odd example in that there were no data initially. Because of the lack of engagement with fishers are not yet suspicious too much. They're just happy to be engaged and actually someone to care about, you know, their livelihood, so to speak, because that hasn't been the case in recent history. So yeah, time will tell. But I'm happy to, if there's any research sort of validity in the Pacific or through SPC, I think it would be great to see how it can contribute to tails or to other locations. I know that Vanuatu have used the pelagic system for tracking some of their fads even, which is not designed for, and I wouldn't recommend it, but it's but also they've got them on some of the boats. So I mean, if you could integrate that with tails, that might be something really valuable. We can talk more about that another time if need be.
All right, thanks. We will be in touch again to talk about some of this stuff. And again, we'll things come up this afternoon, and I'm sure we'll get back to you with some questions. So once again, thanks for your time, Alex. Really appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex.